Horror Fanatic here, and let's talk about a book, The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon by Stephen King. I really liked this book, though I do feel like I was missing something from it key element-wise, and that's I'm not a big fan of baseball, so when he touches on, like, this iconic season that Tom Gordon was having, it was mainly lost on me until I got to the afterword. But I did really connect to the main aspect of this book, which is being lost in the woods. Now, I'm going to say I'm an experienced backpacker, but I wouldn't go as far as saying I'm an avid or diehard one. Longest trip has been 4 days, and it was over a rugged trail of the PCT, but that compared to being lost for a week are two very different things. And he touches on some stuff in here that's really important that you learn early on when you get into outdoorsy things, like not leave the trail, so to say, but to not take shortcuts off the trail to try to catch up, as that's always a good way to get lost. She slides down a hill initially really wrong, and later on does it correctly. Well, correct-er, which is sliding down on her butt. But even then, like, she probably should have looked for a better route down, as one probably presented itself further downstream. But that's of her early moments with what's known as bush panic. The fear of, like, okay, just 5 more minutes and I'll see that trail. Just 5 more minutes and I'll be on that trail. And you keep going and you keep going and you keep going until you're lost, and then before you know it, you're running. And at that point, you're already hopelessly lost. And as an adult, I've only been lost in the woods for about 15 minutes before I remembered I had a map, a compass, and I knew the area well enough that I was able to get out of there with a short walk that I found a road that I knew to. I just got turned around. And that's me knowing the area, and for a little girl walking off of a trail which can be as treacherous, even though it's much more well maintained than the PCT here in Oregon, is the Appalachian. As there is, the book says, vast swaths of wilderness to get lost into if you're careless or unlucky, and she's a little bit of both. So the book starts out with Trisha, her mother Quilla, and her older brother Pete going on a day hike along a small section of the Appalachian Trail. And due to their parents' recent divorce, Pete has a lot of resentment, and he constantly argues with his mother, which happens again on this trip. And due to their constant arguing and overlooking her, as she's only 9, but big for her age, the book points that out, that she falls further and further behind them to get away from it. And then she does start to touch on the majesty of what a hike and a backpacking trip's about. Before she decides she needs to go pee, and she doesn't even need to go pee badly, but she leaves the trail regardless just to have peace of mind, and then decides to take a shortcut rather than backtracking, and ends up getting lost. And she then, as Stephen King points out, a number of things that are, like, good things to do. Like, she picks up her garbage and is very meticulous about not damaging her environment. But that's the last thing you want to do if you're trying to leave a trail to be noticed by people trying to rescue you. Like, if she would have discarded, like, sandwich baggies and stuff like that, anything to give, like, the search and rescue teams an idea of where she was, or which direction she might have been heading in. Like, if she would have taken anything and notched trees, or done a number of things to try to help rescuers, or after she had become lost, to just initially stay put. Like, when she found, instead of wandering, as soon as she became lost by this initial log she crawls under and gets scared by a snake, if she had doubled back to that log, or when she decided she was too far to go back to that log and stayed put, she probably would have had to wait a couple of days at worst, but she would have been so much closer to the search teams that it would have been Tom Gordon comes into play in this book as well, as I like him a lot as the character, which is far removed from who he is in reality. And the form that she listens to him close out a game, her first night in the woods, and decides that if he can get the save for a Red Sox game, she'll be saved. And you think crazy things when you're in the woods. But every night she tunes in to listen to the Red Sox on a dying Walkman as she travels further and further and further and further into the woods. And she does stick to some pretty good ideas, like following a source of water, because generally one stream will lead to another, which will lead to another, and people, bridges, things exist around water, so it's typically easier to be found when following water. That said, she also runs into the problem that comes with that, and that's a lot of times they'll disappear, go nowhere, become a marsh, and that's a real gamble to take when you're lost. But as she spends progressively more and more time in the woods, she has to start combating things, hunger, the elements, her own loneliness is a big factor here. But it also touches on something that a lot of Stephen King novels touch on, and that's faith, religion, God. And in this one, I really like how it's done. At one point, she's sick and recently fed for the first time in a long time, to the point of fullness, and falls asleep, or hallucinates, or is actually visited, since this is more of the realm of magical realism. It depends on how you want to approach this book, because there is support for it both ways, with a leaning towards the magical realism that she actually experienced stuff, and that's when she's visited by the three gods. The god of Tom Gordon, who he signals to after a save, and states that he is too busy to help. Then there's her father's god, the Subaudible, who exists but is so prevalent and constant that we stop perceiving and hearing it like you do background noise. And I really liked that as a metaphor for God in this book. And the last one was the god of the lost, the Hornet Priest, who is, as she gets stung early on by hornets, becomes a reoccurring motif as this creature that's stalking her. She constantly feels watched and followed, and it's because she is. All the way to the confrontation at the end of the book when she's suffering from pneumonia, starvation, delirious, and on the verge of dying from exhaustion, when she has to confront this creature. And I really like how that's handled as well, and it makes her feel strong and like she's matured a lot over the course of her journey that you've taken with her, and I really enjoyed that. I also really love that over the course of the novel, it takes moments for her to recognize the beauty that's out in nature, the dancing of butterflies, like the way certain views look, storms and rain, and I like that even in this dreary situation, she takes the moments or notices the innate beauty in a situation. And I really loved that worked in as well, because that was in essence what they were trying to do by her whole trip with her mother and her brother. Trisha is by far and away the major character in this book, and she spent 90% of it alone with her as she journeys through the woods, with the remaining 10% dedicated to her family and her family's reaction to the hunt for her in the woods, and even then, later on with the reaction after a false tip leads them after a pedophile. And also there's the Red Sox players and the announcers that become characters as well, but they're there for so short and only through her frame of reference that I really liked that. And other than that, it's just her being alone in the woods, slowly succumbing to the elements. And for a 9-year-old girl, if this was real, did a great job managing to survive, and probably did a lot better than I would have done in that same situation when I was 9. But that said, a little bit of here feels like lax parenting is the cause of the loss, as well as it takes a long time for her to be noticed missing by Pete and her mother. And even then, it's not the mother, but Pete who notices his sister missing. Which has a profound effect on him as well when she later, when his bits come up. I really liked this book. It's part cautionary tale, it's part like inspirational story, it's part like a theology with God. It's a little bit of love for nature. Stephen King manages to touch on a lot of really beautiful notes that I love, all within a rather condensed story that's clean and straightforward, and it doesn't feel like there's a bunch of extra stuff crammed in here. It's a clean, simple story for the sake of a clean, simple story, well, with some magical realism. And that was my thoughts on Stephen King's The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon. I would recommend it as a read if you're a Stephen King fan, if you're outdoorsy or you love like Lost in the Woods sort of stories. It's wonderful. It's also good as a cautionary tale. It's also got like a very hopeful, like uplifting elements to it as well. But that's all, and I will see you next month.